welcome back, or thanks for staying around. This is our next talk in the tech track. I'm presenting you Astha Singhal from Netflix. Netflix has been mentioned here before for a good reason. Whenever I hear of Netflix, it's about solving problems in a very elegant and beautiful way, problems that I personally didn't even know they existed. And the moment I realized there is a problem, Netflix has already solved it for good. So finding somebody from Netflix interested to present at a conference has been one of the goals in recent years. And I'm very happy that Tanya Janka, who was here last year, met Astha Singhal at AppSec California and immediately tweeted to me, "Christian, you need to invite her. She's a great speaker." So I'm very happy that she heard our call. I'm presenting you Astha Singhal from Netflix.
Hi, everyone. So as Christian mentioned, my name is Astha Singhal, and I lead application security for Netflix. What that means is I help secure all of the applications that help run the Netflix business that's within its cloud infrastructure. So it could be kind of the streaming product itself and everything else that we use to run our studio business and all of the applications that help us do things like provide customer service, things like that. So today I'm here to share my experience with you guys of moving from sort of like the enterprise software world to a company like Netflix, which has a very, very different engineering culture. But before I get into that, I want to give you a little bit of historical context. So I started in security in sort of academia, doing things like learning about security protocols, doing research in that space. Alice wants to talk to Bob. How do they do that securely? So that was kind of how I got into security. My first real-world job in security was doing consulting. So I was the person who got to come in, break everything, hand over a report with sort of recommendations of here's what you should do, throw the report over the fence, and walk away, right? And that was easy. It was fun. It was also a lot of variety and being able to sort of learn about different type of security issues that can exist in different environments. From that, I switched to more of an embedded product security role. What that means is I was a part of a team that really worked very closely with engineers that were building the products that the customers of that company would be using and then helping them build secure software. And I was doing that at an enterprise company. So even though code was being written in 2-week sprints in that world, it was only going to production to our customers once every 3 months. So patches and things like that are going out all the time, but really any major release is only going out once every 3 months. And then from that, I started exploring Netflix as an opportunity to potentially kind of go do application security there. And as I was trying to understand sorry, this is not. OK, yeah, so as I was trying to understand the scope of the problems I would be solving there, as you may all know, Netflix is a global consumer-facing product that has really, really high availability requirements. We handle millions of customer credit cards, PII, and with everything we do in sort of the studio space, as we are also content creators, we are basically trying to digitize kind of the whole process from pitch to production, meaning building a suite of apps that lets creators and content promotion and scheduling for the production schedules, all of that sort of stuff, being able to bring all of that online. So we call that Studio in the Cloud. And in that world, there is assets like pre-release content or licensed content from other providers or talent PII or PII of all the contractors and stuff like that that are working on those projects. So obviously, the security scope was pretty interesting. And the question in front of me then was, how do I change my approach in a very, very different culture to be able to achieve the same security goals that I was doing before? I'll talk about that more from the standpoint of product security or application security. Really, before I can get into that, I kind of need to tell you a little bit about Netflix culture, because it's pretty unique, and I think it really, really affects how we do engineering. So beyond sort of, the engineering aspect of how we operate in terms of continuous delivery and DevOps, there is other cultural aspects of the company that really affect how we do security. So at Netflix, we have this concept of freedom and responsibility. It really defines how we do things. So what that means is all employees at Netflix have the freedom to be able to, make decisions or do things that they need to do to get their job done, as long as they understand that it's their responsibility to make sure that they're doing the right thing for the business. So what that means is people are able to move a lot faster, there's a lot of accountability related to decisions, and people feel a lot of ownership for the work that they are doing. The other concept is this thing called context, not control. So what that means is, I'll talk about it more in the context of security. So for the security team, what that means is we as the security team can provide context on what is the business impact or what is the risk of a vulnerability or a bad design decision or anything that could potentially have a security impact, but we don't actually get to be the person with the stick of you shall do this. We don't have the control, we have the ability to provide context, and that coupled with freedom and responsibility means that the developer is actually able to make the right decision for the business after understanding that impact. And obviously, there's an asterisk on the control, because I call that saving no for a rainy day. So I think sometimes there's always going to be situations where the risk is too high and you may not be okay with somebody else owning the decision, but that happens very, very rarely in our environment. Okay, so given these two concepts, the way we do security at Netflix is sort of guided by this thing called guardrails, not gates. So because we don't really have as many, security approvals or sign-offs or any, gating mechanisms, what we do have is guardrails for people to be able to do the right thing easily. So building secure by default platforms, building security controls into the infrastructure so that, if you're trying to do something, the secure way is the easy way to do it. We call it paved road. So the infrastructure paved road, for example, means if you were to use, say, the infrastructure paved road project generator, then you will get a bunch of other features for free. So you'll get things like telemetry and performance and all of that sort of stuff and security for free as long as you're on the paved road. You have the ability to go off the paved road if you want, but really it's going to be additional work for you. So in this case, you're actually creating more incentive to be on the paved road. And that sort of applies to security as well, where we make it easy to do the right thing. Now, historically, the way I had always learned to think about product security was, this group of defenders who are finding, fixing, and preventing vulnerabilities. How are they doing that? We're doing that by doing things like threat modeling, code reviews, penetration testing of features that are getting released, running things like static and dynamic analysis, consulting with developers, telling them how to fix a vulnerability correctly, and doing developer training so developers can understand what is the right way of doing something, and actually go and fix things that way. So this is what I had learned at first when I started in product security. which was sort of like, this made a lot of sense to me. You plug into the SDLC for how a developer is releasing code, right? So you give them ongoing training. As they're kind of writing down the requirements for the features, you also have them embed security requirements in that phase. When they do architecture and design reviews, security becomes a part of those. You help them understand their attack surface. When they're implementing things, you run static analysis, and you verify their implementations by doing pen testing and running dynamic analysis. And at the end, when they're ready to release, you sign off, and they're good to go. And now they release something into the wild. And you obviously have an incident response plan to make sure you are prepared in case something goes wrong. This seems very sane, right? This seems like we've thought through things. And this worked well in sort of like that 3-month model that I talked about before. But now I was in an engineering culture where, one, things are going to production all the time. It's continuous delivery. Code is being pushed out multiple times a day. So there is really no security approvals or security gates, right? So there is no way to know everything that is being released because that could be happening multiple times a day. And even if there was a way for me to go know everything, I wouldn't be able to go sign off on every code commit, right? Because there is not enough time and resources to review everything. For context, the current AppSec to developer ratio at Netflix is about 1 to 220. So for every 220 engineers, there is one security engineer. So if you think about that ratio, it's really not possible for us to go and review everything that's going out. And obviously, it's a place where people like to move really fast. People like to do a lot of innovative things. But manual security approvals would actually just slow everything down, even if we figured out a way to do this, right? Because at the end of the day, as AppSec engineers or ProdSec engineers, our job is to enable the business. Our job is to reduce risk for the company while helping them move fast. And another thing is, we're in like a highly polyglot environment with lots and lots of microservices. And turns out doing code analysis in an environment like that is really hard because, you can lose sort of your taint tracking when it goes across services. And then you have to figure out how to prioritize if code's being written in multiple languages. So at this point, as I got there and I learned more and more about the environment, this was my reaction. I was totally freaking out because I was like, okay, now everything I know and learn about doing product security and putting secure software out there can actually just go out the window because I can't apply those concepts as it is in this environment. But as I started to learn more about the environment I was in now, I realized that there is a lot of advantages to this continuous delivery model that they have. So the first big advantage is the fact that having a centralized CI/CD is a great place to hook in security automation. Because centralized CI/CD is a lot about developer productivity. So if you can actually hitch your security wagon to developer productivity, that's a great thing. Because if the CI/CD tools are helping the developers move fast, then more and more of the developers are going to use those tools. And then if your security automation is plugged into those workflows, then they are automatically getting the security benefit by just using the productivity tools. So a great example of this is having, say, vulnerability scanning for third-party dependencies to make sure that we are not introducing vulnerable code when new products or new jars are being pulled in to our code. So really using CI/CD as a way to hook in security automation. The second advantage is actually kind of a big one, which sometimes I like to say that when you do security in a cloud infrastructure environment, you're really doing security in easy mode. Because you now have a way to be able to automatically go and derive asset inventory, because there is ways for you to be able to query your infrastructure for this information. There's tools for fleet management and things like that that already exist for you to be able to derive this information. Now, what can you do with this information? So let's talk about an app inventory, right? So the kind of insight that I can derive from an app inventory is, oh, is this service going to be external versus internal? How many instances are going to be available? What kind of data is this service going to handle? What domain is this going to be deployed on? And I can actually make risk decisions based on this information now. I can use this information to decide where to invest my limited security resources based on this information. And because you're in this DevOps environment, you also operate in the way everybody else does, meaning operational work is a part of what you do. So there is this concept of on-call to handle all of the interrupt-driven work. So in the traditional model, when you think about what we do as product security engineers, a lot of it is very, very interrupt-driven. So things like answering one-off questions that your developers might have, responding to bug bounty reports, or helping an engineer fix a bug, or do a one-off threat model, or handle a product security incident. So really, all of those things are interrupt work that leads to you never being able to really focus on your automation efforts, right, in the historical model. But now, because you have on-call, you can actually use that to be able to handle all of that interrupt-driven work. And in this world, security is not special. Security work is planned and prioritized the same way as everything else. So what that means is the way your developers are prioritizing performance work or reliability work, they will do the same thing for security work, because you kind of operate in a way where you're working with them the way all other teams are, and it just becomes a part of their workflows. It becomes a responsibility of the developer to make the decision of understanding the context, understanding the impact of the vulnerability you've reported, or this big project you want them to do to roll out Auth0 to all their services. They can actually sort of understand the impact based on your context and then make the decision. And in this concept of paved road for infrastructure and for really all things, there is an opportunity for you to be able to incorporate security controls in there. So we work pretty closely with our identity engineering and our platform security team, really the folks who are building these controls, things like app-to-app authentication or secure secret storage or authorization. Really, all of these services, now application security can work really closely with these teams to figure out what the right controls are that our engineers need, and actually just go and incorporate those in our paved road. So the paved road becomes a way for you to be able to get security work in by default. When we talk about sort of threat modeling and the fact that we handle that as a part of some of our on-call work, historically, the way you would think about threat modeling a new app, this is what it would be, right? You would look at all of the different components that may affect that app, and then you would actually have to figure out how each of these things are talking to each other, and then really do the analysis sort of that whole ecosystem. But in the world where you have sort of this concept of paved road, where there is default ways of doing a bunch of these things, really what you have to focus on is a really, really small piece of that, because that's the only new piece, right? And then it becomes a lot easier to handle that with an hour-long conversation as opposed to sort of like a multi-day big project that you may have to do otherwise. So in this world, this is kind of how my team spends a lot of their time. The biggest bucket for us is really that automation piece. And in the past, really a lot of automation work I had done was more in sort of the static and dynamic analysis space to try to do code analysis better and really vulnerability discovery better. But now we're focusing our automation a lot more in things like application inventory, things like deriving risk of an app based on that application inventory, figuring out what security paved road components is that application using. What components should it be using based on the risk that we have determined? And finding ways to give the developer that insight themselves and then making security self-service for them as opposed to them having to come to us for everything. In this world, obviously, I think we spend about 1/3 of our time for on-call and interrupt type things. So really what that means is one person from the team every week is really taking one for the team, meaning that week they handle all of the interrupts, they handle things like inbound requests and bug bounty reports and all kinds of things that would be considered an interrupt, and then everybody else gets to be heads down on whatever they're working on. And obviously, we still need that partnership component to continue working closely with parts of the business that have higher risk. So at that point, the one-on-one consulting type work that is most common for product security engineers, that becomes a very small part of the service that we provide as a team. So in this model, I felt like things that needed to change was you really, really need to figure out how you enable your developers using self-service. How do you go where they are? How do you integrate with the developer workflows so that security is not this special thing for which they have to go to another place, and that is just not something they're going to want to do? How do you build secure by default platforms so that it doesn't have to be bolted on? Security becomes a part of sort of the default platform that they're using. And really, when you think about engineering and automation, focus those resources on scaling your product security team, not on things that may not have as much benefit in sort of a very kind of fast-moving environment. And really creating better automated visibility for your developers so that they can know what is the security work they need to do and take action on those things without needing the security team to actually come and tell them what they need to do. But obviously, there is a ton of stuff that stays the same, right? It's still really, really important for you to build relationship with your customers across the organization, because let's say you built a self-service tool for providing security guidance, but if you don't have a relationship with different parts of the business and your engineers don't know to go fill out that questionnaire, then they're not going to do it. Or if you don't have an existing relationship with a part of the business, they're not going to have enough incentive to actually listen to you or even be able to kind of understand where you're coming from. So that aspect, that customer focused aspect of security still stays the same. And then obviously your security work is still driven by enterprise risk. It's still driven by things you care about as a company from a risk standpoint. You're just automating a lot of how you're deriving that enterprise risk for your applications because you have like a large amount of applications now. And then obviously, you continue to provide that one-on-one guidance for the high-risk areas of your product because there is value to that because you're covering sort of the 90% with automation and still be able to do the strategic partnerships with high-risk areas. And developer training is still relevant, but instead of teaching your developer how to not have XSS or how XSS works, what you'll teach them is, oh, here's the default frameworks we have available that you should just use and not have to think about XSS. They don't need to be security experts. And then obviously you still need to continue to do pen testing and bug finding because things always slip through the cracks. So taking like a risk-based approach to figuring out what are the parts of your application that you'll continue to pen test and find bugs in, it's really important to continue doing that. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Wow. Let's take a couple of questions. Where do you have something? No imminent question? Let me break the ice a bit. I define myself quite much as a security engineer, and I put an emphasis on the security, and I feel important. How do you see people accepting this cultural change that security is just something like everything else?
Yeah.
How do people cope with that? Or do you happen to not have these people anymore at Netflix because they run away?
Actually, most of the security engineers that work at Netflix are people that are really, really passionate about engineering, and they see that the engineering-focused approach and of not being sort of the special snowflake is what works in the real world, and they're really happy to do things that way because they're seeing results, and they're seeing kind of better relationships with our customers, they're seeing better buy-in from our customers.
So you would see when you live in such a culture, then you realize that it actually helps. It's
yeah,
not
I was skeptical
distracting
about it at first too. Yeah.
Because you came from a different organization as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. Other questions? They're so stunned because you're miles ahead of the pack. There is a question over there. Thank you.
In the quarter of what you're doing, there is this partnership chunk. Does that include also being engaged in project, or do you provide them with good enough guidelines of how they should do their projects in order to not screw up security, or is that completely delegated to your architecture?
No, so the partnership work that we do is, kind of what we'll do is we'll work with the engineering team to actually build a security roadmap for them that they can execute over multiple quarters. So it's actually more strategic work where, okay, we've seen a few things in this area where something is getting logged that shouldn't. So working on having a wrapper for, your logger class and actually implementing that, or rolling out strong security controls in some part of your ecosystem where we're seeing some problems. So it's really more strategic and bigger projects as opposed to sort of like the one-offs. For some teams, like our payments engineering team, we do help them with sort of that code level stuff as well, but that's really more the exception than the rule.
Thanks. Other questions?
There's one over there.
There is one? I overlooked it. Yeah, there is one.
You mentioned guardrails, not gates, in the beginning. It was on one of your slides, I think.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, so our personal experience with static and dynamic application security testing is that the number of findings can be immense. And I just wonder, it can be a huge number of findings, vulnerabilities. And if you just leave that to the developers and say they are responsible for fixing that, how is that supposed to work? I'm just a bit skeptical, how that works in practice.
Yeah, no, so for us, actually, static and dynamic analysis ends up with a lot of false positives. So the kind of things that we do is actually invest more in tooling where it's a sort of more smart grep type stuff as opposed to static analysis. And then we do dynamic analysis on our internet-facing services. So what happens with those is the results that go to my team first, and then our on-call will actually look through those and then validate the issues and then file vulnerability tickets for things that are valid.
Good. Thank you very much, Astha.
Thank you.
So glad to have you here. Thank you for your talk.